The autumn wind swept across the Wyoming prairie like a restless spirit, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Ella Carter stood on the weathered porch of her ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the jagged mountains that rimmed the valley. The sky bled crimson and gold, colors that reminded her of William's favorite neckerchief, the one he'd worn the day the wild Mustang threw him and broke his neck. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd buried her husband beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek, yet the ache in her chest remained as raw as fresh-turned earth. At 32, she was neither old nor young, caught in that peculiar purgatory reserved for widows in the frontier. Too proud to return east to her sister's charity, too stubborn to sell the ranch William had built with his own hands. She existed in a state of determined solitude. The Carter Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of decent grazing land, 5 miles outside the dusty settlement of Dust Creek. It wasn't much compared to the big spreads owned by men like Malcolm Pritchard, but it was hers. The dozen head of cattle, the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, all of it represented a life carved from wilderness through sheer will and calloused hands. As darkness crept across the land, Ella made her evening rounds. She checked the horses in the stable, ensuring old Moses and young Buttercup had fresh water and hay. She latched the chicken coop against coyotes and counted the hens. All 12 accounted for. The milk cow, Bessie, lowed softly as Ella passed, and she paused to stroke the animal's warm flank. It was during these quiet moments that the loneliness pressed heaviest. The ranch felt too big, too empty. Even the wind seemed to mock her isolation as it whistled through the gaps in the barn walls. She'd grown accustomed to talking to the animals, finding comfort in their wordless companionship. Sometimes she caught herself setting 2 plates at dinner or calling out to William to wash up for supper, only to remember, that night, as she lay in the iron bed that suddenly seemed vast as an ocean, Ella heard it for the first time, a sound that didn't belong to the familiar symphony of prairie night. It was faint, almost lost beneath the chorus of crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. But it was there, a rhythmic tapping, metallic and deliberate, coming from somewhere behind the house. She sat up, straining to listen. The sound stopped. After a few minutes, convinced she'd imagined it, she settled back against her pillow. But sleep eluded her, and she found herself listening for the strange noise until exhaustion finally claimed her near dawn. The next evening, it happened again. This time, Ella was certain. The sound came from the direction of the old storage shed at the edge of the property, a ramshackle structure William had built their first year on the ranch. They'd used it for tools and supplies before constructing the proper barn, but it had stood empty for years now, slowly surrendering to wind and weather. Ella pulled on her boots and William's old coat, its familiar smell of tobacco and leather providing a measure of courage. She considered taking the shotgun but decided against it. Probably just a loose board or a piece of metal roofing working free in the wind. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she lit the kerosene lantern. The October night was crisp, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Her breath misted in the cool air as she crossed the yard, dry grass crunching beneath her feet. The tapping had stopped again, as if whatever made it sensed her approach. The shed loomed before her, a darker shadow against the night. Its door hung slightly askew, secured with a rusty padlock she couldn't remember locking. Ella held the lantern high, yellow light dancing across weathered wood and casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her with gnarled fingers. "Hello?" Her voice sounded thin in the vastness of the night. "Anyone there?" Silence answered her. Even the crickets had hushed their song. She approached the door, noting with puzzlement that the padlock, despite its rust, showed signs of recent handling, scratches in the oxidation, a shine where fingers had gripped it. A coyote howled in the distance, and Ella jumped, nearly dropping the lantern. She laughed at herself, a nervous sound that died quickly in the still air. This was foolishness. She'd faced down wolves, birthed calves in blizzards, and survived 3 years alone on this unforgiving land. A creaky old shed held no terrors for her. She turned to go, but something made her pause. There, barely visible in the gap beneath the door, was a thin line of disturbed earth, as if something had been dragged across it recently, or someone had been digging. The next morning, Ella found herself thinking about the shed as she went about her chores. The mystery nagged at her like a splinter under the skin. She'd lived on this ranch for 8 years, knew every board and nail of it. That shed had been locked and forgotten for so long that prairie roses had grown up around it, their thorny vines creating a natural barrier. Yet now, examining it in daylight, she could see signs of disturbance. The vines had been carefully pulled aside in places, tied back with what looked like strips of cloth. The ground around the door was scuffed and compressed, grass worn away to bare earth. Most troubling of all, she found what appeared to be a small handprint in the dust on the doorframe, too small to belong to a grown man. As the days passed, the sounds continued with eerie regularity. Always at dusk or dawn, always that same rhythmic tapping. Sometimes Ella thought she heard other sounds too, whispers of movement, a muffled cough quickly stifled. She began to watch the shed from her kitchen window, but never saw anyone approach or leave. The rational part of her mind offered explanations. Drifters sometimes used abandoned buildings for shelter. Perhaps some traveling family had taken refuge there, too proud or frightened to ask for proper lodging. The thought of someone in need so close by, yet afraid to seek help, troubled her deeply. Dust Creek wasn't known for its charity toward strangers. The town had grown harder in recent years, especially since Malcolm Pritchard had expanded his mining operations. His Silver Crown mine drew rough men and desperate souls, changing the character of what had once been a peaceful farming community. Even the sheriff, Tom Brennan, seemed different lately, quicker to look away from trouble, slower to help those without money or influence. On a gray morning when frost silvered the grass and breath came in white puffs, Ella made her decision. Whatever secret the shed held, she would uncover it. She could no longer ignore the feeling that someone needed help, possibly someone young and vulnerable. She dressed carefully, choosing William's leather vest over her usual shawl. It made her feel braver, more capable. She loaded the shotgun, not to use, she told herself, but as a precaution. The weight of it in her hands was reassuring as she crossed the frozen yard. This time, she didn't call out. She moved quietly, noting fresh scratches on the padlock, drops of what might be blood on the doorframe. Her heart began to pound as she reached for the lock, remembering suddenly that she'd never had a key for it. William had lost the key years ago and they'd simply left it locked, forgotten. Yet now, as she examined it closely, she realized the lock was broken, carefully positioned to appear secure while actually hanging open. Someone had gone to great trouble to maintain the illusion that the shed remained undisturbed. With trembling fingers, Ella removed the lock and pulled open the door. The hinges shrieked in protest, the sound sharp as a scream in the morning stillness. She raised the shotgun, pointing it into the darkness within, though her finger remained off the trigger. "I know someone's in there," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I mean no harm, but I'm armed. Come out slowly." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, From the deepest shadows at the back of the shed, she heard a small voice, a child's voice, frightened and desperate. "Please, please don't tell Mr. Pritchard we're here." Ella's shotgun wavered as her eyes adjusted to the gloom inside the shed. What she saw made her heart clench like a fist. 3 children huddled together in the far corner, pressed against the rough wooden walls as if trying to disappear into them. Their faces were pale smudges in the darkness, eyes wide with terror that belonged on no child's face. The oldest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 13, held the 2 younger ones, boys perhaps 8 and 6, protectively behind her. All 3 were filthy, their clothes little more than rags hanging on 2 thin frames. Empty tin cans littered the floor around them, along with a few moldy blankets that looked as if they'd been salvaged from a trash heap. "Oh, Lord have mercy," Ella breathed, lowering the shotgun immediately. "Children, what are you doing here?" The girl's chin lifted with a defiance that reminded Ella of a cornered wildcat. Despite her obvious fear, she stepped forward slightly, shielding the boys. "We ain't done nothing wrong, ma'am. We'll leave if you want. Just please don't tell Mr. Pritchard." That name again. Malcolm Pritchard owned the Silver Crown mine and half the businesses in Dust Creek. He was wealthy, powerful, and according to most, untouchable. But what would 3 starving children have to do with him? "I'm not going to hurt you," Ella said gently, setting the shotgun aside entirely. "And I'm certainly not going to tell anyone anything until I understand what's happening here. What's your name?" "Child." The girl studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether trust was a luxury she could afford. "Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah McKinnon. These are my brothers. Not real brothers, but might as well be. This here's Tommy, and the little one's Jacob." Ella crouched down, making herself less threatening. In the growing morning light streaming through the door, she could see them more clearly now. Bruises in various stages of healing marked their exposed skin. Their hair was matted, faces gaunt with hunger. The youngest boy, Jacob, coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of illness. "How long have you been hiding here?" "4 days," Sarah replied. "We found the broken lock and—" "We didn't mean no harm, ma'am. Just needed somewhere safe to rest up." "Safe from what? From whom?" The children exchanged glances, and Tommy, the middle child, spoke up in a whisper. "From the mine. From Mr. Pritchard's men. They'll come looking for us." Ella's mind raced. She'd heard whispers about conditions at the Silver Crown mine, but Pritchard employed mostly Mexican and Chinese workers who kept to themselves, along with drifters who appeared and disappeared like tumbleweeds. "Were you working in the mine?" "But your children—" "He bought us," Jacob said matter-of-factly, as if explaining that water was wet. "From the orphanage over in Cedar Falls. Said we owed him for room and board and had to work it off." The words hit Ella like a physical blow. She'd heard of such arrangements, orphanages apprenticing out children to learn trades. Supposedly. But this was something else entirely. "How much do you owe?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Sarah's laugh was bitter, too old for her years. "More every day," he says, "for food, for the bunks, for the clothes on our backs, for the air we breathe. Tommy here, he's good with numbers. He figured out we'd be working until we died and still not pay it off." Ella stood abruptly, anger flooding through her. "Come out of there, all of you, come into the house." The children shrank back. "We can't," Sarah said, "they'll see. They'll find us. Mr. Pritchard's got men watching all the roads, all the towns. He's got papers saying he's our legal guardian. Even got the sheriff to sign them." "The sheriff?" Ella couldn't hide her shock. Tom Brennan had always seemed like a decent man, if a bit too fond of whiskey and cards. Mr. Pritchard owns half the town, Tommy said quietly. Including the sheriff. That's what the other kids said, anyway. Other kids? Ella felt sick. How many? Dozen or so, last count, Sarah replied. Some younger than Jacob here. They bring in new ones when the old ones. She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Ella made a decision. You're coming with me, now. I don't care what papers anyone has. But ma'am, no arguments. That boy needs medicine and proper food, and all of you need baths and decent clothes. We'll sort out the rest later. She reached for Jacob, but the boy flinched away so violently he knocked over several cans. The clatter seemed explosively loud in the morning quiet. It's all right, Ella said softly, her heart breaking. I won't hurt you, I promise. My name is Mrs. Carter, Ella Carter. This is my ranch. You're safe here. It was Sarah who moved first, perhaps recognizing something in Ella's face that spoke of genuine concern. She took Jacob's hand. Come on, Jake. The lady's trying to help. Slowly, painfully, like wounded animals emerging from a den. The children followed Ella from the shed. In the full morning light, their condition was even more appalling. Their feet were wrapped in rags instead of proper shoes. What she'd taken for dirt was actually coal dust ground so deep into their skin it had become part of them. Jacob's cough worsened in the cold air, his small body shaking with each spasm. How did you escape? Ella asked as she led them toward the house, constantly scanning the horizon for riders. There was a cave-in, Tommy said. Part of Tunnel 3. Mr. Hodges, he was the foreman, got caught in it. In the confusion, Sarah grabbed us and we ran. Figured they'd think we got buried too. We've been walking at night, hiding during the day, Sarah added. Found your shed night before last. Seemed empty, forgotten. We thought maybe. You thought right, Ella said firmly. Now, quickly inside before anyone sees. The children hesitated at the threshold of her home, as if crossing it might break some spell of safety. Ella understood. After whatever they'd endured, trust would come hard. The stove's warm, she said. And I've got stew from last night, bread, fresh milk. When's the last time you ate properly? The mine gave us gruel twice a day, Sarah said to watery stuff. Sometimes a bit of salt pork if we met quota. Quota? The word made Ella's hands clench. Children working quotas in a mine. She'd heard of such things back east, in the big cities. But here, in Dust Creek. Once inside, the children stood awkwardly in her kitchen, afraid to touch anything. Ella bustled about, ladling stew into bowls, slicing thick pieces of bread, pouring milk. She set the food on the table and had to encourage them twice before they'd sit. They ate like starving wolves, hardly pausing to breathe. Jacob struggled with his cough between bites, and Ella made a mental note to brew some horehound tea for his chest. She watched them devour the simple meal as if it were a feast, and anger built in her chest like a gathering storm. Tell me everything, she said when they'd slowed down. From the beginning. Sarah wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then seemed to remember manners and used the napkin Ella had provided. We were at St. Catherine's orphanage in Cedar Falls. It wasn't a bad place, not good, but not bad. Then Mr. Pritchard came with some other men, said he was looking for strong children to apprentice at his business. Good wages, he said, room and board. He said, a chance to learn a trade. The sisters didn't want to let us go, Tommy added. But he had papers from a judge, said it was all legal and proper. They picked 12 of us. Sarah continued. The older ones, mostly. Said we'd be working in the offices, learning bookkeeping and such. But when we got to Dust Creek, She shuddered. They took us straight to the mine, put us in a bunkhouse with bars on the windows, said we had to work off our transportation costs first. That was 6 months ago, Tommy said quietly. Billy Harmer died in the second month, cave-in. Martha got the lung fever and passed last month. And Samuel. He looked at Sarah, who shook her head sharply. Ella didn't need to hear more to understand. Children dying in Pritchard's mine while the town looked the other way. How was such evil possible? Does anyone else know? Have you told anyone? Who'd believe us? Sarah asked bitterly. We're just orphans. Nobody's children. Mr. Pritchard's got legal papers. He's got the sheriff, the judge, probably half the town council. Who's going to stand up for us? I will, Ella thought fiercely, though she didn't say it aloud. These children had likely heard too many empty promises already. Instead, she said, first things first, baths, clean clothes, and proper rest. Tommy, I'll heat water for the tub. Sarah, in that chest by the stairs. You'll find some of my old things. They'll be too big, but they're clean. I'll need to go to town later for proper clothes and medicine for Jacob. Our town. All three children looked panicked. You can't. They'll know. They'll ask questions. Then I'll have answers, Ella said calmly, though her mind was racing. She needed help. But who could she trust? Not the sheriff, clearly. Perhaps Pastor Williams or Dr. Henley. But if Pritchard's reach extended as far as the children claimed, a sound made them all freeze. Horses approaching, moving fast. The children went white as sheets, and Jacob began to cry silently, tears streaming down his grimy face. Upstairs, Ella commanded, quickly. Under the bed in the first room, not a sound. They fled like spooked deer. Ella grabbed the bowls from the table, shoving them into the wash basin, then smoothed her hair and apron. By the time the riders entered her yard, she was standing on the porch. William's shotgun cradled casually in her arms. 3 men reined up before her house. She recognized 2 as hands from the Silver Crown mine. The third, riding slightly ahead, was Malcolm Pritchard himself. Malcolm Pritchard sat his black stallion like a king surveying his domain. Everything about him spoke of power and prosperity, from his tailored wool coat to his polished boots that had never known a day's honest work. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and cold gray eyes that missed nothing. When he smiled, as he did now, it reminded Ella of a snake sunning itself on a rock. Mrs. Carter, he said, touching the brim of his expensive hat. Fine morning, isn't it? Mr. Pritchard, Ella kept her voice neutral, though her grip on the shotgun tightened. What brings you all the way out here? Just making rounds, checking on neighbors. His eyes swept over her property with the calculating gaze of a man who put a price on everything he saw. A widow woman, living alone so far from town, it's admirable, really. Though I imagine it gets lonely. I manage well enough. I'm sure you do. He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. Actually, Mrs. Carter, I'm here on rather urgent business. We've had some property go missing from the mine. Valuable property? Tools, equipment? Ella asked innocently. Pritchard's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. Workers. 3 young apprentices who were contractually obligated to my operation. They disappeared during an unfortunate accident a few days ago. We've been quite worried about them. How terrible, Ella said. Children, you say? Young workers, he corrected smoothly. Learning a valuable trade under my guidance. Their welfare is naturally my primary concern. One of his men, a rough-looking fellow with a scar across his jaw, spat tobacco juice near her porch steps. We tracked him this far, boss. Trail goes cold around here. Is that so? Pritchard's gaze never left Ella's face. Mrs. Carter, you haven't seen any strangers about, have you? 3 young people, 2 boys and a girl? They might appear disheveled. I'm afraid not. As you said, I live alone. I'd certainly notice visitors. Of course. Pritchard dismounted with fluid grace, his men following suit. You won't mind if we have a look around, just to ease my worry about these poor children? Ella's heart hammered, but she kept her expression calm. Actually, Mr. Pritchard, I do mind. This is private property, and you have no legal right to search it. Legal right? His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. My dear Mrs. Carter, I have guardianship papers for these children signed by Judge Morrison himself. That gives me every right to retrieve my property. I mean, my wards, wherever they might be hiding. Then I suggest you return with Sheriff Brennan and a proper warrant. Ella said. Until then, I'll thank you to get off my land. The scarred man stepped forward aggressively. Now listen here, woman. Silas. Pritchard's voice cracked like a whip. The man stepped back immediately. Mrs. Carter is quite right. We should observe the legal niceties. He remounted his horse with the same easy grace. Though I should mention, Sheriff Brennan is a good friend, as is Judge Morrison, as are most of the prominent citizens of Dust Creek. It would be unfortunate if you were found to be harboring runaways. The law takes a dim view of those who interfere with legal contracts. Is that a threat, Mr. Pritchard? Merely an observation. You see, I'm a reasonable man. I understand these children might have filled your head with wild tales. They're prone to exaggeration, having come from unfortunate circumstances. But I assure you they're well cared for at the mine. 3 meals a day, clean beds, honest work. Why, I'm practically a philanthropist, giving these orphans a chance at a productive life. Ella thought of the bruises, the cold ground skin, the terror in their eyes. How generous of you. Indeed. He gathered his reins. I'll give you some time to think. Mrs. Carter, if these children should happen to appear, I trust you'll do the right thing. After all, a widow trying to run a ranch alone. So many things can go wrong. Fences cut, cattle wandering off, wells contaminated. Terrible accidents happen on the frontier. The threat was naked now, hanging in the air between them like a drawn blade. Ella met his gaze steadily. My husband taught me to shoot, Mr. Pritchard. Taught me well. I sleep light, and I don't miss what I aim at. A brave words. He smiled that snake smile again. But bullets don't stop legal papers, Mrs. Carter, and they certainly don't stop progress. Good day. They rode off in a cloud of dust, but Ella didn't move until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the porch rail, her legs suddenly weak. She knew men like Pritchard, men who viewed others as possessions, who wielded law and money like weapons. Fighting him would be like fighting the wind. But those children upstairs needed her, and William would never have forgiven her for turning them away. She found them huddled under her bed, Jacob pressed between the older 2, all of them shaking. It's safe, she said gently. They're gone. Sarah crawled out first, her face set in hard lines. He'll be back, with the sheriff, like he said. You should have let us run, ma'am. Now you're in danger too. Hush. Nobody's running anywhere. Tommy, help me get Jacob out. Careful now, mind his cough. As she helped them downstairs, Ella's mind raced. She needed allies. But who? Then she remembered Jonas McGraw. The former Union soldier lived a half-day's ride north, keeping to himself mostly, but he'd helped William break horses a few times. More importantly, he had no love for men like Pritchard, having fought a war against those who'd claimed to own human beings. Can you children ride? She asked. Some, Tommy said. They had us moving equipment sometimes, used old mules. A good Sarah. Those clothes I mentioned, fetch them now. Tommy in the barn. Saddle Moses and Buttercup. Use the old saddles in the back. You're sending us away? Sarah's voice cracked, showing her youth despite her tough facade. Not sending, taking, and we're all going, but first... Ella went to William's desk, pulled out paper and ink. She wrote quickly, explaining the situation, pleading for help. Tommy, you said you're good with numbers. Can you read and write too? Yes, ma'am. The sisters taught us at the orphanage. Good boy. She sealed the letter. If something happens, if we get separated, you take this to the church in Cedar Falls. Give it to Father Miguel. He'll know what to do. She packed quickly, food, water, blankets, her small savings, William's pistol. The children changed into the clean clothes, looking almost normal except for the fear that clung to them like a second skin. As they prepared to leave, Ella took one last look around her home. She might never see it again. Pritchard would make sure of that. But some things mattered more than property. They were saddling the horses when hoofbeats thundered in the distance, too many to be Pritchard's small group. Ella's heart sank. He'd already gathered reinforcements. Into the barn, she ordered, quickly. But as the riders crested the hill, she saw with surprise that they wore no badges, carried no official authority. Instead, they were Mexican and Chinese workers from the mine, at least a dozen of them, led by an elderly Chinese man she recognized as Chen Wei, who sometimes bought vegetables from her garden. Mrs. Carter, Chen Wei said, dismounting stiffly. We hear you have the children. Ella raised her shotgun warily. I don't know what you mean. Please. His weathered face was kind but urgent. We are not with Pritchard. We come to warn. He brings many men, maybe 20. Sheriff, too. They come within hour. One of the Mexican workers, a young man with intelligent eyes, added, The children. They are not the first. Others have died in that mine. We could not save them, to our shame. But these three, when they ran, we prayed they would find safety. Why should I trust you? Ella demanded, though something in their faces gave her hope. Because, Chen Wei said simply, we know what it is to be property in the eyes of men like Pritchard. We know what it is to have no voice, no rights. But together, perhaps. He was interrupted by Jacob's coughing. The boy had wandered to the barn door, drawn by voices. At the sight of him, thin, sick, obviously one of the missing children, the workers' faces hardened with shared anger. Ay, Dios mío, one whispered, they are so young. We will help, Chen Wei decided. My cousin has wagon hidden in the wash. We take them to the railroad camp. Workers there will hide them. Get them on train going east. But must go now. Ella hesitated. Trust came hard when betrayal could mean death or worse. But what choice did she have? Not the railroad, she said finally. They'll check there first. I know another place, a ranch north of here. The owner is sympathetic to those in need. Then we make diversion, the young Mexican said. Some of us ride south, leave clear trail. Others go to town, spread word children were seen near the river. Give you time to reach this ranch. Why? Sarah asked, stepping out despite Ella's gesture to stay hidden. Why help us? You don't know us. Chen Wei smiled sadly. Because, little one, we know what it is to work in darkness with no hope. You ran. You gave us hope that running is possible. That is worth any risk. And so, in the growing morning light, an unlikely alliance formed, a widow, 3 runaway children, and a group of immigrant workers united against a common enemy. They moved quickly, efficiently. Half the workers rode off to create false trails. Others helped transfer supplies to a covered wagon Chen Wei's cousin produced from its hiding spot. "Ma'am," Tommy said quietly as they prepared to leave. "What about your ranch? Your home?" Ella looked back at the house William had built, the land they'd tamed together. "It's just property," she said, though her heart ached. "You children are what matters now." As they climbed into the wagon, Sarah suddenly grabbed Ella's hand. "Why are you doing this? You could have just turned us in, kept yourself safe." Ella thought of William, of the children they'd never had, of all the dreams that had died with him. "Because," she said, "some things are worth fighting for, and because I've been alone too long. Now hush. We need to move." Chen Wei rode alongside as they started north, his presence reassuring. Behind them, dust clouds suggested Pritchard's force was approaching. But they had a head start, and more importantly, they had help. "Mrs. Carter," Chen Wei said, "this fight, it will not end with running. Pritchard will not give up easily." "I know," Ella replied, checking that William's pistol was within reach. "But these children will not go back to that mine, not while I draw breath." The wagon rolled on, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain future. Behind them, their allies spread out across the territory, sowing confusion and false leads. And somewhere ahead lay Jonas McGraw's ranch, and perhaps a chance at justice for 3 children who'd already seen too much darkness in their short lives. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. It would be a long day, Ella knew, and likely an even longer fight. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly alive. She had a purpose again, something worth protecting. Pritchard had his money, his men, his legal papers. But she had something more powerful, the determination of those who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The wagon jolted over rough terrain, each bump eliciting a painful cough from Jacob. Ella had cushioned him as best she could with blankets, but the boy's fever was rising. Sarah held his head in her lap, whispering soothing words while Tommy kept watch through a tear in the canvas cover. "Riders coming," Chen Wei called softly from his position alongside the wagon. "From the east, 3 men." Ella's hand found William's pistol. They were still 2 hours from Jonas McGraw's ranch, traveling through a narrow valley with steep sides, poor ground for running or fighting. The wagon driver, Chen Wei's cousin Liu, urged the horses faster, but the tired animals had little more to give. "Wait," Tommy said suddenly. "That's not Pritchard's men, that's the sheriff." Through the gap in the canvas, Ella could see he was right. Sheriff Tom Brennan rode ahead of 2 deputies, his tin star glinting in the late morning sun. They were moving at an easy pace, apparently unaware of the wagon ahead. "Maybe they don't know," Sarah whispered hopefully. "Maybe they're just patrolling." But Chen Wei shook his head grimly. "They know. Brennan always knows. Question is, whose side is he on today?" The sheriff's group had spotted them now. Brennan raised a hand, spurring his horse forward. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Ella made a decision. "Stop the wagon," she told Liu. "Children, stay hidden. No matter what happens, stay quiet." She climbed out, standing straight despite her fear. Chen Wei dismounted but stayed close to his horse, ready to flee if needed. The sheriff approached slowly, his weathered face unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Mrs. Carter," Brennan said, touching his hat brim. "Bit far from home, aren't you?" "A free country, Sheriff, last I checked anyway." He smiled thinly. "That it is. Mind telling me what's in the wagon?" "Supplies. I'm visiting a friend north of here." "That's so?" Brennan dismounted, his deputies flanking him. "Funny thing, Malcolm Pritchard came by my office this morning. Says some valuable property of his went missing." Says you might know something about it. Mr. Pritchard seems to say a lot of things. That he does. The sheriff walked closer, his spurs jingling. Known you for what? 8 years now, Ella? Known you since you and William first came to Dust Creek. Good people, both of you. William helped me out of a tight spot once. Drunk cowboys making trouble. Never forgot that. Tom, your thing is, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. Man in my position has to follow the law. And the law says those children belong to Pritchard. He's got papers. Legal guardianship. Signed by Judge Morrison himself. Illegal papers don't make slavery right, Ella said quietly. Brennan's face hardened. Careful with such words. That's dangerous talk. The truth often is, they stood facing each other in the dusty road, the morning growing hot around them. One of the deputies shifted nervously, hand near his gun. Chen Wei hadn't moved, but Ella could feel his tension. Then, from inside the wagon, came the sound of violent coughing. Jacob, unable to suppress it any longer. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the wagon, then back to Ella. That doesn't sound like supplies to me, he said. Before Ella could respond, Sarah burst from the wagon. Please, she cried, throwing herself at the sheriff's feet. Please don't send us back. He'll kill us. He's already killed Billy and Martha and... Sarah, no. Ella reached for her, but the girl clung to Brennan's legs, sobbing. We didn't do nothing wrong. We just don't want to die in that mine. Please, Sheriff, please. Brennan stood frozen, looking down at the desperate child. His deputies exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't what they'd expected, a simple retrieval of property. This was a terrified child begging for her life. Get up, girl, Brennan said gruffly, and get up now. Tommy and Jacob had emerged too, the younger boy barely able to stand. In the harsh sunlight, their condition was undeniable. The bruises, the coal-stained skin, Jacob's obvious illness. They looked like what they were, abused children who'd been worked nearly to death. Jesus Christ, one of the deputies muttered. Tom, they're just kids. Shut up, Henderson. But Brennan's voice lacked conviction. He stared at the children, then at Ella. You know what you're asking me to do? You know what happens if I let you pass? I know what happens if you don't, Ella replied. These children die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And their blood will be on your hands. Tom Brennan. You'll see their faces every time you close your eyes. The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. Pritchard owns half the town. The judge, the mayor, most of the town council, cross him. And I'm not just out of a job. I'm a dead man. Then come with us, Ella said suddenly. Leave it all behind. Start fresh somewhere Pritchard can't reach. With what? My good looks and charming personality? Brennan laughed bitterly. I'm 53 years old, Ella. This badge is all I got, all I know. Chen Wei spoke up. Sheriff, you know what goes on in that mine. You've always known. We see you turn away, pretend not to notice. But you're not a bad man, just a frightened one. You don't know nothing about me, Chinaman. I know you have daughter, Chen Wei said calmly. She lives in San Francisco now, yes? Married to merchant. You have picture of her in your office. Sometimes you look at it when you think no one sees. Brennan's face flushed. What's that got to do with anything? Look at this girl, Chen Wei gestured to Sarah. She could be your daughter, someone's sister. If your little girl was trapped, scared, hurt, wouldn't you pray for someone to help her? The sheriff stood silent for a long moment. His deputies waited, tension thick as dust in the air. Finally, Henderson spoke again. Tom, for God's sake, look at them. I am looking, Brennan snapped, then softer. God help me, I am looking. He walked to the wagon, peered inside as if hoping to find something that would make his decision easier. When he turned back, his face looked 10 years older. There's an old mine road, he said quietly. Heads northwest through Skeleton Pass, rough going. But it'll get you around the main trails. Pritchard won't think to look there. Too dangerous for wagons. Most say. Tom? Deputy Henderson sounded shocked. What are you doing? I'm not doing anything, Brennan said firmly. We came out here following a tip about rustlers. Didn't find nothing, didn't see nothing. That's what we'll report. He looked at his deputies. Unless either of you boys has a problem with that? The second deputy, a young man named Cutter, shook his head quickly. No, sir, didn't see a thing. Henderson grinned. Rustlers are getting clever these days, leaving no trace at all. Brennan put his hat back on. Suddenly all business. The pass is about 2 miles back, marked by a split boulder looks like a broken heart. Trail's barely visible, but it's there. Watch for loose rocks. Lost a prisoner transport there once. Went right over the edge. Why? Ella asked. Why help us? The sheriff mounted his horse, not meeting her eyes. William saved my life once. Consider the debt paid. He paused. And maybe I'm tired of looking at that picture and wondering what kind of man her father really is. He turned his horse, then looked back. You've got maybe 3 hours before Pritchard figures out we haven't seen you. After that, he'll expand the search. If I were you, I'd dump that wagon soon as you can. Too easy to track. Horses would be better. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me, girl. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. So maybe I can sleep tonight without whiskey. He spurred his horse. Move fast, move quiet, and maybe you'll live to see another state. Henderson. Cutter. Let's go find those rustlers. The 3 lawmen rode off, leaving dust and hope in their wake. Chen Wei was already turning the wagon. This pass, I know it. Dangerous, yes, but possible. We must hurry. As they backtracked to find the split boulder, Ella felt a mixture of relief and fear. They'd gained an ally, or at least neutralized an enemy. But Brennan was right. Pritchard wouldn't give up easily. And now they were heading into dangerous territory with sick children and a wagon unsuited for mountain travel. Ma'am, Tommy said, and what if the sheriff changes his mind? What if he tells Pritchard? He won't, Ella said with more confidence than she felt. Tom Brennan has many faults, but he keeps his word. Always has. They found the split boulder. It did indeed look like a broken heart, cracked down the middle by some ancient force. The trail beyond was barely more than a goat path, winding up into the rocky heights. Liu looked at it dubiously. A wagon won't make it, he said, on too narrow, too steep. Then we walk, Ella decided, on take what we can carry, leave the rest. They worked quickly, loading supplies into makeshift packs. Jacob was too weak to walk, so Chen Wei fashioned a carrier from blankets and rope. I carry him, he said. I am stronger than I look. As they prepared to enter the pass, Sarah tugged on Ella's sleeve. Mrs. Carter, why are all these people helping us? The sheriff, Mr. Chen, the other workers, they're risking everything. Ella looked at the ragged group, Chinese and Mexican workers, 3 escaped children, and 1 widow, all united in defiance of a powerful man's cruelty. Because, she said, sometimes people remember what it's like to be human. Sometimes that's stronger than fear. They entered Skeleton Pass as the sun reached its zenith, beginning a perilous journey through treacherous terrain. Behind them, they could hear nothing yet, no pursuit, no shouts. But Ella knew it was only a matter of time. Pritchard would come, with all his fury and resources. But for now, they climbed higher, step by careful step, carrying hope on their backs along with their meager supplies. The pass stretched ahead, dangerous and uncertain, but it was a path to freedom, and that made every risk worthwhile. Just a little farther, Ella encouraged the children. Jonas McGraw's ranch is on the other side of these mountains. We'll be safe there. She prayed she was right, because if she was wrong, they were walking into a trap from which there would be no escape. The descent from Skeleton Pass proved even more treacherous than the climb. Loose shale shifted beneath their feet, and more than once someone slipped, saved only by quick hands and providence. Chen Wei carried Jacob with remarkable endurance, but even he was breathing hard by the time they reached the valley floor on the far side. Jonas McGraw's ranch lay before them in the fading afternoon light, a modest spread with a sturdy log house, a well-maintained barn, and several corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sight after their harrowing journey. "That's it," Ella said, relief flooding through her. "We made it." But Chen Wei held up a hand for silence. "Something wrong," he whispered. "Too quiet. No dogs barking, no movement." He was right. A working ranch should show signs of activity, especially at this hour. The stillness felt ominous, like the held breath before a storm. "Stay here," Ella commanded. "Let me go first. Jonas knows me." She approached the house cautiously, William's pistol ready. The front door stood slightly ajar, unusual for a man as careful as Jonas McGraw. "Jonas," she called. "It's Ella Carter. I need your help." No answer. She pushed the door wider, stepping into the dim interior. The house was empty, but showed signs of recent habitation, warm ashes in the fireplace, fresh bread on the table. Then she saw it, a note pinned to the wall with a knife. "Mrs. Carter, Pritchard's men came through this morning, asking questions. I've gone to gather the old regiment, boys, when if you're reading this, you're in danger. Take what supplies you need. There's a hidden cellar under the barn's third stall. Use it. We'll return with help by midnight. Trust no one else. J.M." Ella's hands shook as she read. Pritchard had anticipated their move, or perhaps Sheriff Brennan had been forced to talk. Either way, their sanctuary was compromised. She hurried back to the others. "Jonas is gone, but he left word. We can hide in his barn. There's a secret cellar. He's bringing help." "It could be trap," Lou said nervously. "Maybe Pritchard's men waiting." "Maybe," Ella agreed, "but we have no choice. Jacob needs rest and shelter, and we all need food. We'll be careful." They approached the barn like soldiers entering enemy territory. Chen Wei and Liu searched it thoroughly while Ella kept watch. The building appeared empty, filled only with hay, tools, and the comforting smell of horses, though the stalls were vacant. "Here," Tommy called from the third stall. He'd found the concealed trapdoor Jonas mentioned, cleverly hidden beneath a layer of straw and dirt. Below, a ladder descended into darkness. The cellar was small but well provisioned. Lanterns, blankets, preserved food, even medical supplies. Whoever had built it had planned for emergencies. They settled the children below, Chen Wei tending to Jacob with surprising gentleness. "His fever is high," Chen Wei said quietly to Ella. "He needs doctor soon, or—" He didn't finish, but Ella understood. They'd come so far, saved them from the mine, but Jacob might die anyway from the damage already done. "There are medical supplies," she said. "Do what you can. I'll keep watch above." As darkness fell, Ella and Liu took turns standing guard. The Mexican workers who'd helped them had long since scattered, pursuing their various deceptions. Only Chen Wei and Liu remained, and Ella wondered at their loyalty to children they barely knew. "Why stay?" she asked Chen Wei during his watch shift. You could have left once we reached the pass. The older man smiled sadly. I had daughter once, back in China. She would be Sarah's age now if she lived. When I see these children, I see her. I see all children who suffer while powerful men grow rich. Perhaps if I help them, her spirit rests easier. Around 10 o'clock, Tommy climbed up from the cellar. Mrs. Carter, Sarah wants to talk to you, but she's real upset about something. Ella found Sarah sitting apart from the others, arms wrapped around her knees. In the lantern light, she looked even younger than her 13 years. What is it, child? Sarah looked up with haunted eyes. It's my fault, all of this. If I hadn't run, if I'd just stayed and worked like they wanted. Don't. Ella sat beside her, pulling the girl close. Don't you dare blame yourself for wanting to live, for wanting freedom. But people are risking everything for us. You lost your home. The sheriff might lose his job or worse. What if people die because of us? Ella thought carefully before answering. Sarah, evil men count on good people doing nothing. They count on us being too scared, too worried about ourselves to help others. Every person who's helped you made a choice, to stand up instead of looking away. That's not your fault. That's their courage. I don't understand why they do it for us. We're nobody, just orphans. You're somebody, Ella said fiercely. You're a brave girl who protected 2 younger boys. Now you're a survivor, and you're going to grow up free. I promise you that. Sarah leaned into her, and for a moment she was just a scared child seeking comfort. Then hoofbeats sounded in the distance, many horses moving fast. Down, Ella hissed. Everyone down. Blow out the lanterns. They huddled in darkness as the riders approached. Ella crept to a crack in the barn wall, peering out. Her heart sank. At least 20 men, some carrying torches. Pritchard rode at their head, his face twisted with fury even at this distance. But then she saw something else, another group approaching from the opposite direction. These men moved differently, with military precision despite their civilian clothes. Jonas McGraw led them, and Ella recognized several faces from town. The blacksmith Anders, the baker Friedrich, old Doc Henley. Veterans all, men who'd fought in the war between the states and still remembered what they'd fought for. The 2 groups met in front of the house, tension crackling between them like lightning about to strike. McGraw, Pritchard's voice carried clearly. Should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. My property. Malcolm, Jonas replied calmly. He was a lean, weathered man in his 50s, missing his left arm from Antietam. You're trespassing. I'm retrieving stolen property. 3 indentured workers, legally contracted to me. I have the papers right here. Papers, Jonas spat. I've seen your papers, seen what you do to those children in your mine. It stops tonight. You threaten me? Pritchard laughed. You and what? A dozen washed-up soldiers? I own this county. McGraw, the law is what I say it is. Funny thing about the law, a new voice interjected. Ella's heart leaped as she recognized it. Sheriff Brennan, riding up with his 2 deputies. But whose side was he on? Tom, Pritchard said warily. Good. Arrest these men for interference with legal contracts. I can't do that, Malcolm. Brennan dismounted slowly. See, I've been doing some thinking. Some investigating. Turns out those guardianship papers of yours, they're forgeries. Judge Morrison's signature doesn't match his others. Real sloppy work. You're lying. Am I? Also turns out the real Judge Morrison is visiting his daughter in Denver. Has been for 2 weeks. Whoever signed those papers, it wasn't him. Pritchard's hand moved toward his gun. You've made a serious mistake, Sheriff. Probably, Brennan agreed, but I can live with it, and question is, can you? The tension stretched taut. Pritchard's men shifted nervously. outnumbered now and facing veterans who knew how to fight. But Pritchard himself seemed unconcerned, even amused. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. "I'll get new papers, real ones this time. Those children are mine by right of debt. They owe me for transportation, housing, food." "They owe you nothing," Ella said, stepping out of the barn. Every gun swung toward her. She walked forward steadily, head high, until she stood between the two groups. "Ella, no," Jonas warned, but she ignored him. "Mr. Pritchard wants his property," she said loudly. "Well, here I am, but the children stay free." Pritchard smiled that snake smile. "Mrs. Carter, I wondered when you'd show yourself, but I'm afraid you can't bargain with what isn't yours to give." "Can't I?" She pulled a paper from her pocket, the letter she'd written earlier, but with new additions made in the cellar. "This is my last will and testament, witnessed by Chen Wei and Liu Zhang. It states that I'm adopting those 3 children as my legal heirs. It also details everything they've told me about your mine, the deaths, the beatings, the conditions. Copies have been sent to newspapers in Denver and San Francisco. It was a bluff. No copies existed yet, but Pritchard didn't know that." His face darkened. "You meddling." "Furthermore," Ella continued, "I'm prepared to testify in federal court about what I've seen and heard. The children will testify too. Sheriff Brennan here seems ready to investigate your operations properly. How many federal laws have you broken? Mr. Pritchard, how many graves would we find if we searched around your mine? You have no proof of anything." "Don't I?" Sarah emerged from the barn, followed by Tommy supporting Jacob. Chen Wei and Liu flanked them protectively. "We're the proof. Our bodies are the proof. Every scar, every bruise." Jacob, despite his weakness, spoke up in a thin but clear voice. "You killed Billy Harmer. Said it was an accident, but Samuel saw you push him. That's why you killed Samuel too." Gasps ran through the assembled men. Even some of Pritchard's hired guns looked uncomfortable. Child labor was one thing. Many turned a blind eye. But murder? Lies, Pritchard snarled. The ravings of ungrateful brats. "Maybe," Sheriff Brennan said. "But I think a federal marshal might want to hear these ravings, especially since I've been getting reports of similar situations in Colorado and Nevada. Seems you've got quite an operation. Malcolm, or should I say, had." Pritchard's control finally snapped. He drew his gun, pointing it at Ella. "Enough! Those children are coming with me, or I'll—" The shot came from behind him. One of his own men, a grizzled miner, had drawn and fired into the air. "That's enough, boss. I signed on to collect debts, not murder women and children in cold blood." "Anyone else feel that way?" Jonas asked mildly, his remaining hand resting on his pistol. Several of Pritchard's men shifted uncomfortably, then began backing away. The odds had shifted decisively against him. Pritchard stood alone now, still pointing his gun at Ella but aware that dozens of weapons were trained on him. "This isn't over," he said. "I have friends. Powerful friends. You'll all regret this." "Maybe," Ella said, "but not tonight. Tonight, these children sleep free. Tonight, they start healing. That's worth any risk." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Pritchard slowly lowered his gun, his face a mask of rage. "You've made an enemy today, Mrs. Carter. All of you have. I don't forget, and I don't forgive." He mounted his horse, spurring it viciously. His remaining men followed, eager to be away from the scene. They disappeared into the darkness, but the threat lingered like smoke. "It's not over," Jonas said quietly. "He'll be back. Through the law, through hired killers, through whatever means he can find. Then we'll be ready," Sheriff Brennan said. I'll wire the federal marshals tonight. With the children's testimony and a proper investigation, we can shut down his whole operation. In the meantime, Doc Henley said, pushing through the crowd, let me see that boy. No, from here he looks half dead. As the doctor examined Jacob, Ella felt the tension drain from her body. They'd won this battle, but Jonas was right. The war was far from over. Pritchard had resources, connections, ways to strike back. But looking at the faces around her, veterans who'd risked everything, a sheriff who'd found his conscience, immigrant workers who'd shown incredible courage, she felt hope. They weren't alone anymore. These children had brought together an unlikely alliance of people who understood that some things were worth fighting for. Mrs. Carter, Sarah said softly, and did you mean it? About adopting us? Ella knelt, gathering all three children close. Every word, if you'll have me. I know I can't replace what you've lost, but... Yes? Tommy said quickly. Yes, please. Jacob, weak but smiling, nodded. Sarah threw her arms around Ella's neck, crying freely for the first time. Then it's settled, Ella said through her own tears. We're a family now, and families protect each other. As Doc Henley worked on Jacob, as plans were made for the legal battles ahead, as the night deepened around them, Ella held her new children and made silent promises. They would heal. They would grow. They would never again know the darkness of Pritchard's mind. And if Malcolm Pritchard wanted a war, she'd give him one. Because a mother's love, she was learning, was the fiercest force on the frontier. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet at the McGraw Ranch. Doc Henley had set up a makeshift infirmary in Jonas's spare room, tending to Jacob's fever and the various injuries all three children carried. The boy's condition improved slowly, though his cough lingered like a shadow of the mine that had nearly killed him. Sheriff Brennan had indeed contacted the federal authorities, but word traveled slowly on the frontier. It could be weeks before marshals arrived from Denver. In the meantime, Jonas had turned his ranch into an armed camp. Veterans took shifts standing guard, their old service rifles cleaned and ready. On the morning of the 4th day, Ella was helping Sarah with reading lessons when Chen Wei burst through the door. Riders coming, many riders, and wagons. Everyone scrambled for positions. Ella pushed the children toward the cellar, but Sarah resisted. We're tired of hiding, she said firmly. If they've come for us, we'll face them. Through the window, Ella saw an unexpected sight. Not Pritchard's hired guns, but a procession of wagons driven by women and children. She recognized Mrs. Olson, the minister's wife, and Mrs. Fitzgerald from the general store. Behind them rode more townspeople, merchants, farmers, even some of Pritchard's own miners. Jonas stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but lowered. State your business. Mrs. Olson, a formidable woman in her 60s, climbed down from her wagon with surprising agility. Our business, Mr. McGraw, is justice. We've come to see these children the whole town's talking about. Now hold on, Jonas began, but she cut him off. For too long, we've turned blind eyes to what happens at that mine. Told ourselves it wasn't our concern. Well, I've got grandsons not much older than these boys. The thought of them in such a place. She shook her head. We've come to help. And to bear witness. More wagons arrived throughout the morning. The Methodist church ladies brought food and clothing. The Catholic sisters from the mission school offered to help with the children's education. Even some of the saloon girls appeared, pressing coins into Ella's hands for the little ones. But it was the arrival of the miners that truly shocked everyone. Led by the same grizzled man who'd spoken up against Pritchard, nearly 30 workers approached on foot. He names Josiah Steele, the leader said, hat in hand. We've voted. We're on strike until Pritchard answers for what he's done. And we'll testify to what we've seen in that mine. The children worked to death, the unsafe conditions, all of it. You'll lose your jobs, Jonas warned. Pritchard will bring in scabs, blacklist you all. And some things matter more than jobs. Steele replied, We've all got children, or remember being children. What's happening in that mine ain't right. Never was. As the crowd grew, Sarah tugged on Ella's sleeve. Why are they all here? Why now? Because, Ella said, courage is contagious. One person stands up, then another, then another. Soon, even the powerful have to listen. But Malcolm Pritchard wasn't listening. He was plotting. The attack came that night, swift and brutal. Not a frontal assault. Pritchard was too clever for that. Instead, fires bloomed across the valley, the Methodist church, the general store that had supported the children, the homes of those who'd spoken out, all began to burn simultaneously. It's a diversion, Jonas realized. He's drawing us away. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Windows shattered. Women screamed. In the chaos, Ella lost sight of the children. Sarah, Tommy, Jacob. She searched frantically, dodging bullets and flames, and the smoke was thick, choking, turning the night into a hellscape of shadow and fire. She found them in the barn, Chen Wei standing guard over them with an old pistol. But they weren't alone. Pritchard himself stood there, backed by 6 hard-looking men. Mrs. Carter, he said pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a social gathering. I've come for my property. Hand over the children, and this all ends. Continue to resist, and I'll burn this entire valley to ash. You're insane, Ella said. The whole territory will turn against you. Will they? I'll claim it was an accident. A lantern knocked over, spreading to dry grass. Tragic, really. As for the children, they'll simply disappear. Runaways are so common on the frontier. Sarah stepped forward, that familiar defiance blazing in her eyes. We'll never go back. You'll have to kill us first. If necessary, Pritchard said coldly. Though dead workers bring no profit, I prefer you alive and working. The standoff stretched taut. Outside, the sounds of fighting continued. Ella could hear Jonas shouting orders, Sheriff Brennan's voice rising above the chaos. But in the barn, it was just them, a widow, an elderly Chinese man, and 3 children against 7 armed men. Then Jacob did something unexpected. The youngest, the sickest, the one they'd all been protecting. He began to sing. His voice was thin and raspy from the cough, but the melody was clear. It was an old hymn the sisters at the orphanage had taught them, a song about deliverance and hope, and "Shut him up," Pritchard ordered, but Jacob kept singing. Tommy joined in, then Sarah, their voices growing stronger together. Even Chen Wei began to hum along, though he didn't know the words. I said, "Shut up." Pritchard drew his gun, pointing it at Jacob. Ella moved without thinking, stepping between the gun and the child. You'll have to shoot me first. And me, Chen Wei said, moving beside her. And me. The voice came from behind Pritchard. Josiah Steele and a dozen miners had entered the barn, surrounding Pritchard's men. You want to murder children, boss? You'll do it in front of all of us. Let's see how that plays in court. More people crowded in. Townspeople, veterans, even some of Pritchard's own hired guns who'd switched sides. The barn filled with witnesses, all standing between Pritchard and the children. This is conspiracy, Pritchard raged. I'll have you all arrested. With what authority? A new voice asked. A man in a federal marshal's badge stepped through the crowd. Marshal Grant Holloway. Came as fast as I could when I got Sheriff Brennan's wire. Mr. Pritchard, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges I'll sort out later. You can't arrest me. I own this town. You might own the town, Marshal Holloway said, But you don't own the law. Not the real law, anyway. He nodded to his deputies. Take him. Pritchard made a fatal mistake then. He turned his gun on the marshal. The barn erupted in gunfire, but it was brief. When the smoke cleared, Pritchard lay on the ground, clutching a wounded shoulder. His men had thrown down their weapons. Unwilling to fight federal marshals and half the town. It's over, Marshal Holloway announced. Anyone who worked for Pritchard, you've got one chance. Testify to what you know, and we'll consider leniency. Keep your mouths shut, and you'll share his cell. The aftermath was swift. Pritchard's empire, built on exploitation and fear, crumbled in days. The mine was shut down pending investigation. The children, not just Sarah, Tommy, and Jacob, but 9 others found still working in the depths, were freed. The resulting trial would become legendary in the territory, a landmark case about child labor and human rights. But that was all to come. That night, as fires were extinguished and wounds were tended, Ella sat with her 3 children in Jonas McGraw's kitchen. They were dirty, exhausted, traumatized, but free. Is it really over? Tommy asked, still disbelieving. This part is, Ella said, no, there's still healing to do, still a life to build, but yes, you're free. No one owns you. No one ever will again. Sarah leaned against her. What happens now? Now? Ella smiled, thinking of her burned ranch, her uncertain future. Now we go home. We rebuild. We live. Home? Jacob repeated, testing the word like a foreign language. We have a home? You do, Jonas McGraw said from the doorway. He'd been burned in the fighting, his face bandaged, but his eyes were warm. Ella, your ranch is gone, but my offer stands. This place is big enough for all of us. Partners, if you're willing. The children need stability, and you need a place to start over. Ella looked at him, really looked. She saw not just a friend, but possibly something more. A future neither of them had expected but might embrace. Partners, she agreed, and his smile told her he understood all the word might encompass. Chen Wei, who'd refused to leave until he knew the children were safe, finally prepared to depart. You take care of them, he told Ella. They are precious. What about you? Sarah asked. Where will you go? Back to work, but different now. The miners. We organize. We demand better. What started here doesn't end here. He touched each child's head gently. You gave us courage. We won't waste it. As dawn broke over the valley, painting the sky in shades of hope, Ella stood with her new family. The road ahead would be difficult. The children bore scars, visible and invisible. There would be nightmares, setbacks, struggles to trust and love again. But they would face it together, a widow who'd found purpose, a veteran who'd found redemption, 3 children who'd found home, and a community that had remembered its conscience. Malcolm Pritchard would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, his wealth stripped away to compensate his victims. The mine would reopen under new management, with proper wages and safety standards. And in the history books, a small notation would record how 3 brave children and 1 determined woman had sparked a change that rippled across the frontier. But that was history's version. The truth was simpler and more profound. It was Sarah learning to laugh again, Tommy discovering a love of books, Jacob's cough finally fading as clean air and good food worked their healing. It was Ella tucking them in each night, amazed at how full her heart could be. It was Jonas teaching the boys to ride, patient with their fears. It was a community that had faced its shame and chosen to be better. It was love triumphing over greed, courage defeating cruelty, and the smallest voices finally being heard. As Ella watched her children play in the yard, her children, how wonderful those words sounded, she thought of William. He would have been proud. He would have loved them as she did, and perhaps in whatever came after this life. He was smiling. "I thank you," she whispered to the sky, to William, to God, to whatever force had brought these children into her life. The orphans had been locked in a shed. A widow rancher had broken down the door. And in doing so, she'd found not just 3 children to save, but a family to cherish and a love that would echo through generations. The West was still wild, still dangerous. But in one small corner of it, justice had prevailed, and that was enough to build a future on. The courtroom in Denver was packed to overflowing. Word of the Dust Creek mine case had spread across the territories like wildfire, drawing journalists, reformers, and curious citizens from hundreds of miles away. At the defendant's table sat Malcolm Pritchard, his expensive clothes unable to hide the hollow defeat in his eyes. At the witness stand, Sarah McKinnon spoke with quiet dignity that belied her 13 years. "He said we owed him for the air we breathed," she testified. "Every day the debt grew larger. Billy Harmer tried to keep track, tried to show Mr. Pritchard the numbers didn't make sense. That's when the accident happened." The federal prosecutor, a sharp young man named Theodore Whitman, guided her through the testimony with careful questions. Each answer built the case brick by brick: the forged papers, the deaths, the impossible debts designed to trap children in perpetual servitude. Ella sat in the gallery, Jonas beside her, the boys flanking them. Jacob had gained weight and color in the weeks since his rescue, though he still startled at loud noises. Tommy kept careful notes, his quick mind already showing promise that proper schooling would nurture. When Pritchard's lawyer cross-examined Sarah, trying to paint her as a lying runaway, she met his attacks with steady grace. I'm not educated like you, sir," she said. "But I know right from wrong, and what happened in that mine was wrong." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Miners who'd seen the children worked beyond exhaustion. Townspeople who'd been threatened into silence. The Chinese and Mexican workers who'd risked everything to help. Chen Wei's testimony, delivered through an interpreter, was particularly damning. He produced a hidden ledger he'd kept, documenting every child who'd entered the mine and what had become of them. But it was Jacob's testimony that broke the case wide open. The youngest victim, speaking in his thin, clear voice about watching Samuel die, about children coughing blood in the darkness, about Pritchard personally ordering increased quotas even as workers collapsed. The courtroom was silent except for muffled sobs from the gallery. Pritchard's defense crumbled. His lawyers abandoned claims of legal guardianship when Marshall Holloway produced evidence of the forgery. They couldn't explain the deaths, the conditions, the systematic nature of the exploitation. In desperation, they tried to shift blame to the foreman and overseers. But Pritchard's own meticulous records, seized from his office, showed he'd orchestrated everything. On the day of closing arguments, something unexpected happened. Mary Morrison, the real Judge Morrison's daughter, arrived from San Francisco. She'd heard about the trial and came to testify that her father had been with her when the guardianship papers were supposedly signed. It was the final nail in Pritchard's coffin. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and manslaughter for the deaths in the mine. The judge, a stern federal appointee named Harrison Clark, sentenced Pritchard to 25 years hard labor. "You sought to profit from the suffering of society's most vulnerable," Judge Clark said at sentencing. "You corrupted the law itself to serve your greed. This court sentences you to experience the same hard labor you inflicted on children. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none to spare." As marshals led Pritchard away, he passed close to where Ella sat. For a moment, their eyes met. She expected hatred, threats, defiance. Instead, she saw something worse: emptiness. Malcolm Pritchard was a broken man, his empire dust, his name forever linked to one of the territory's most shameful chapters. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. "Mrs. Carter, how does it feel to have won?" "We didn't win," Ella said quietly. "Those children who died in the mine, they're still gone. The months those survived spent in darkness, that can't be undone. All we did was stop it from continuing." "What's next for you and the children?" Ella looked at her small family, Sarah, growing more confident each day. Tommy, whose intelligence would take him far. Jacob, finally learning what it meant to be a child. And Jonas, steady and strong beside her. The partnership between them deepening into something neither had expected to find again. "We go home," she said simply. "We live, we heal. We make sure this never happens again." The journey back to Dust Creek took 3 days. As their wagon rolled into town, they found it transformed. The old Silver Crown mine buildings had been torn down, the lumber repurposed to build a new school. Where Pritchard's mansion had stood, the community was raising an orphanage, a real one, with oversight and standards and people who cared about the children's welfare. Sheriff Brennan met them at the edge of town, his badge polished bright. "Welcome home," he said. "Town council met while you were gone. Unanimous vote. You're all honorary citizens of Dust Creek, with all the rights and protections that entails. Nobody's taking these children anywhere they don't want to go." The ranch, when they reached it, showed the scars of the fire but also signs of renewal. Neighbors had already begun rebuilding the burned structures. A new house was rising where Ella's had stood, larger than before, with rooms enough for a growing family. "We couldn't let you come home to ashes," Mrs. Olson explained, directing workers with military efficiency. "The whole town pitched in. It's the least we could do after being blind for so long." That evening, as the sun painted the sky crimson and gold, Ella stood on the porch of the partially completed house. The children were helping Jonas with the evening chores, their laughter carrying on the wind. It was such a normal sound, yet miraculous from children who'd forgotten how to laugh. Chenwei had written from California, where he was helping organize workers in other mines. The movement that began in Dust Creek was spreading. Laws were being proposed, investigations launched. It would take years, perhaps decades, but change was coming. A hand touched her shoulder. Jonas stood beside her, his presence comfortable as an old coat. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Ella said, meaning it. "You? Only that it took tragedy to bring us together." He paused, gathering courage. "Ella, I've been thinking. The partnership's working well, but, well, the children need stability, real family, and we're not getting younger." She turned to face him, seeing the question in his eyes, and they were both broken people, scarred by loss. But perhaps that's what made them right for each other. They understood that love could come twice. Different, but no less real. "Hey, Jonas McGraw," she said with a smile, "are you proposing?" "Badly," he admitted. "I'm out of practice, but yes, if you'll have me. If the children—" "Yes," Sarah said from behind them. They turned to find all 3 children watching, grins on their faces. "We discussed it," Tommy added matter-of-factly. "Voted unanimous." "You need us to make it official," Jacob said solemnly. "Can't be a real family without us saying so." Ella felt tears prick her eyes. "Then I guess it's settled." "I guess it is," Jonas agreed, pulling her close as the children cheered. The wedding took place a month later in the newly completed schoolhouse. The whole town attended, even former workers from Pritchard's mine who'd stayed to build new lives. Sarah was maid of honor. The boys served as groomsmen. Chen Wei sent a gift from California, a beautiful piece of jade carved with symbols for family and prosperity. As Ella and Jonas exchanged vows, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. A widow's loneliness, children's desperation, a community's awakening conscience. Evil had been faced and defeated, not through violence but through ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. "Do you, Ella Carter, take this man?" "I do," she said firmly, seeing not just Jonas but the future they'd build together. The reception was joyous chaos. Doc Henley made a speech about stubborn patients who became dear friends. Sheriff Brennan, deep in his cups, sang badly but with enthusiasm. Josiah Steele announced that the miners had formed a legitimate union and negotiated fair wages with the mine's new owners. But the best moment came when Jacob tugged on Ella's wedding dress. "Mama," he said, the first time he'd used that word, "are we safe now? Really safe?" She knelt beside him, this child who'd seen too much but somehow retained his gentle heart. "Yes, my love. You're safe. You're home. You're ours. And we're yours. Forever and always. Promise?" "I promise." As night fell over Dust Creek, the wedding party continued under stars that seemed especially bright. In the territorial capital, lawmakers debated new protections for children. In Washington, reformers pointed to the Dust Creek case as evidence that change was needed. But in the schoolhouse, surrounded by love and laughter, none of that seemed to matter as much as this. A family forged from sorrow but defined by joy. 3 children who'd found parents, 2 adults who'd found love, a community that had rediscovered its soul. The orphans had been locked in a shed, but they'd emerged into light, and that light would guide them through whatever came next, a beacon of hope in the sometimes dark frontier. As Ella danced with her new husband while their children played with others their age, a simple pleasure denied them for so long, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not for the easy path, but for the strength to walk the hard one. Not for a life without sorrow, but for the courage to transform sorrow into purpose. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The children still woke with nightmares. The legal battles weren't entirely over. The ranch needed work. The family needed time to truly mesh. But tonight, there was music and joy and the promise of dawn. Tonight, a widow rancher who'd broken down a shed door could rest in the arms of love, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to find. And in that moment, all was well in their corner of the wild, beautiful, dangerous, and ultimately redeemable West. 5 years had passed since the night Ella broke down the shed door. The McGraw Ranch, as it was now known, sprawled across 400 acres of prime grazing land, the herds healthy and growing. The new house stood proud against the Wyoming sky, its windows glowing warm in the evening light. Sarah, now 18, sat at the kitchen table, carefully composing a letter. She'd grown tall and graceful, her hair neatly pinned, wearing a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. The scared 13-year-old who'd begged not to be returned to the mine had transformed into a confident young woman. "Another letter to Denver?" Ella asked, setting down a cup of tea beside her daughter. "The last one," Sarah said with quiet satisfaction. "The Colorado Women's College has accepted my application, full scholarship for their teaching program." Ella felt her heart swell with pride and ache with impending loss. William would have been so proud, Jonas too. They both glanced at the daguerreotype on the mantel, Jonas McGraw, taken just months before the pneumonia claimed him 2 winters past. He'd lived to see all 3 children flourish, to know his sacrifice and love had borne fruit. He was proud, Sarah said softly. He told me so that last night, said I'd make a difference in this world. Tommy burst through the door, no longer the thin 8-year-old but a strapping teenager who'd inherited Jonas's height if not his blood. Ma, Jacob's got Buttercup saddled for you. Says you promised to ride out to the memorial with him. So I did. Ella rose, bones creaking more than they used to. 40 wasn't old, but the years of hard work and worry had left their marks. Sarah, will you come? In a moment. I want to finish this letter first. The memorial stood on a hill overlooking the valley, a simple stone marker surrounded by wildflowers. They'd built it for all the children who hadn't made it out of the mine, whose names Chen Wei's careful records had preserved. Billy Harmer, Martha Sims, Samuel Clearwater, 9 others whose stories would have been forgotten if not for 3 children's courage. Jacob stood before it, hat in hand. At 13, he was small for his age. The mine years had stunted his growth, but his spirit was immense. He'd discovered a gift for working with horses, could gentle the wildest mustang with patience and kindness. You think they know? He asked as Ella joined him. The ones who died, do you think they know we made it? That things changed? I believe they do, Ella said, putting an arm around him. I believe they're at peace, knowing their suffering wasn't forgotten. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The landscape had changed too. Where Pritchard's mansion once stood, the orphanage now housed 23 children under the care of Sister Catherine and her staff. The mine had reopened as a cooperative, owned by the workers themselves with safety standards that were becoming a model for the territory. Ma, Jacob said suddenly, I've been thinking about what I want to do when I'm grown. Oh? Doc Henley says I could apprentice with him, learn medicine. Says my hands are gentle enough, and I understand suffering. He looked up at her. Could we afford it? The training? We'll find a way, Ella promised, and we always do. Hoofbeats announced new arrivals. Tommy appeared with Sarah, both mounted. Behind them rode 2 more figures, Sheriff Brennan, grayer now but still wearing his star with pride, and surprisingly, Chen Wei. Mr. Chen, Jacob exclaimed, we didn't know you were coming. The elderly Chinese man dismounted carefully, smiling. I came for the anniversary. 5 years since everything changed. Could not miss it. They made their way back to the house as twilight gathered. Inside, the kitchen filled with warmth and chatter. Chen Wei had brought gifts, books for Tommy, who developed a scholar's hunger for knowledge, fabric for Sarah, a beautiful leather medicine bag for Jacob. And for you, he told Ella, producing a small wooden box. Inside lay a jade pendant carved with the character for courage. Because you showed us all what it means. I only did what anyone would. No. Sheriff Brennan interrupted. No. Ella, that's where you're wrong. Most folks would have turned those children away, would have been too scared of Pritchard, too worried about their own safety. You didn't. That takes something special. Speaking of special, Sarah said, eyes twinkling. Ma, aren't you going to tell them about Mr. Garrett? Ella felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sarah McKinnon McGraw. Who's Mr. Garrett? Tommy asked, grinning. He knew perfectly well who, the widowed banker from town who'd been calling on Ella for months. A friend, Ella said firmly, just a friend who sometimes joins us for Sunday dinner. Every Sunday, Jacob added helpfully. And he brings flowers, and looks at Ma like, enough, you 3. But Ella was laughing. Her children, how easily that word came even after 5 years, knew her too well. Robert Garrett was a good man, patient and kind, perhaps in time. But she wasn't ready yet. Jonas's memory was still too fresh, too precious. "There is news from the capital," Chenwei said, tactfully changing the subject. "The Territory Children's Protection Act has passed. Based on what happened here, no more children in mines, factories limited to those over 14, education required until age 12. "It's a start," Brennan said. "Pritchard's in prison for another 20 years, but there are others like him. At least now we have tools to fight them." "Will it be enforced?" Tommy asked with the skepticism of someone who'd seen too much corruption. "We'll make sure it is," Sarah said firmly. "That's why I'm becoming a teacher. Education is the best weapon against exploitation." Ella looked around the table at her unlikely family. Chen Wei, whose courage had helped save them all. Sheriff Brennan, who'd found his conscience when it mattered most. Her 3 children, each brilliant in their own way, each carrying scars but not defined by them. "I have announcement too," Chen Wei said. "I am retiring from organizing work, getting too old for traveling. But the movement is strong now. Others carry it forward." He smiled. "I am buying small farm near here. Thought perhaps I could be honorary grandfather to children who showed me hope is possible." Jacob launched himself at the old man, hugging him tight. "Really? You'll stay?" "If your mother permits." "Permits?" Ella laughed through tears. "I insist. This family can never have too many members." Later. After dinner was cleared and Chen Wei settled in the spare room, Ella found herself on the porch with Sarah. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the unpolluted sky. "I'm scared," Sarah admitted quietly. "About college, about leaving. What if I'm not smart enough? What if the other students—" "He will be privileged to know you." Ella finished. "Sarah, you've survived things that would break most people. You've helped raise your brothers, run a ranch, testified in federal court. College will be a challenge, but not one you can't handle." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. Because I've watched you grow from a terrified girl into a remarkable young woman. Because you're my daughter, and McGraw women, by blood or by choice, don't give up." Sarah leaned against her. "I'll miss this, miss you, and we'll miss you. But you'll be home for holidays, and we'll write every week. Besides," Ella smiled, "someone needs to keep an eye on Tommy when he starts at that fancy academy next year." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, cattle lowing, horses nickering, the distant howl of a coyote. Peaceful sounds, so different from the terror of that night 5 years ago. "Ma," Sarah said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Everything you gave up for us?" Ella thought of her first life, the quiet existence with William, the simple dreams they'd shared. Then she thought of this life, chaos and love, challenge and triumph. 3 children who'd made her heart expand beyond what she'd thought possible. "I gave up nothing," she said firmly. "I gained everything. You 3 gave me purpose when I had none. You made me a mother when I thought that chance was lost. Regret? Never. Not for a single moment. Even when Jacob put that frog in your bed? Well, maybe that single moment. They laughed together, mother and daughter, as the moon rose over the ranch. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Sarah would leave for college, beginning her journey to change the world one student at a time. Tommy would follow his own path to law school, determined to be the kind of lawyer who fought for justice rather than profit. Jacob would heal others as he'd been healed, bringing compassion learned through suffering. But tonight, they were all here, safe, loved, free. The orphans who'd been locked in a shed had become the beating heart of a family. The widow who'd broken down the door had found not just children to save, but a life worth living. and the community that had once turned away from injustice had learned to stand together. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, the railroad that now connected Dust Creek to the wider world. Chen Wei had ridden those rails, spreading word of what happened here. The story had traveled from mining camp to factory floor, from state house to newspaper office. 3 children's courage had lit a spark that became a flame that became a movement. "Should we go in?" Sarah asked. "The boys are probably eating all the pie." "In a moment," Ella said, "let's just be just for a moment." So they sat, mother and daughter, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the house behind them, family waited, blood family and chosen family, the kind forged in crisis but tempered by daily love. Ahead lay partings and reunions, joys and sorrows, the full measure of a life lived well. But between past and future was this perfect now, this moment of peace earned through courage, this breath of gratitude for unexpected gifts, this quiet celebration of love triumphant. The West was changing, laws were changing, hearts were changing. And it had all started with a widow's choice to open a door, to see not property or problems but children who needed love. The rest, as they say, was history, but more than history, it was hope. And in Dust Creek, Wyoming, on a clear autumn night, hope lived on in the laughter of children who'd learned to dream again and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd found her purpose. The shed door, long since burned for firewood, was gone. But what it had concealed and what breaking it down had revealed would echo through generations. Love had won, justice had prevailed, and a family had been born from the ashes of cruelty. It was, Ella thought as she finally led Sarah inside to defend the pie from the boys, more than enough for one lifetime. More than she'd ever dared to dream. And yet, watching her children together, listening to their easy banter and seeing their bright futures stretching ahead, she couldn't help but think it was only the beginning.